Disclaimer.
What is the most fucked up thing you've seen a friend do? A guy I worked with was about to take his wife on a trip back to their mutual hometown in another state. They had a pair of delightful kittens and they asked me if I would watch them while they were gone. I had little experience with cats, but these two were just wonderfully playful. I gave him a call when he got back to arrange returning the kittens, but he said they had picked up a non-cat friendly dog on the journey and he would just drop off the kittens in the woods. Needless to say, I kept them and they were wonderful furry friends for me and eventually to my wife and kids. I still think what would have happened to them if I had not been in the right place at the right time. My dad is a truck driver, and one day while working he saw someone throw something out of a car and was suspicious. It was a bag of kittens. He managed to rescue them and we ended up taking care of them until they were old enough to adopt out. More recently, a neighbor of ours passed away and the children just let her cat out into the neighborhood when they were emptying the house out. He was completely domesticated and had no ability to fend for himself. We ended up bringing him to the vet and taking care of him until a friend of mine with a small child adopted him. They became best friends. I will never understand people who treat animals like objects. It is one of the clearest and biggest red flags someone can display. It horrifies me how many people have animal abuse stories in this post. I have a cat because a neighbor used to have a cat who they would kick out for weeks at a time while they went away, and thought it was funny to have their Rottie chase the poor bastard round the house if he ever came home. They no longer have a cat. I have a cat. If we're talking ex-friends? He beat his child for touching my guitar, the one I brought over specifically to show the boy and let him play with. He was 3. I have a friend like this. I bought a bunch of Legos and set up a whole section in my garage for his kid to play while we hung out. I even built a bunch of small model things for the intention of him disassembling them and being, a child. Dude made his child cry for taking apart one of the parts. The little dude was terrified to touch the Legos after that and wouldn't listen to me when I told him that's the point. I don't want to step in and tell someone how to raise your kids, but when I literally buy shit for him to play with and destroy, don't get mad at him for playing with them and destroying them. Destroy as in break the little models I made. Edit, please don't read too much into this. This was one incident in an over decade-long friendship. He's a great single father who has more struggles than most people I know. For example, I have my first child coming in 4 weeks and he's been over every week helping paint and get the house fixed up. Some of you have said things that upset me because I care about these people. Sorry, you may cut people out after one disagreement, but that's not me. People aren't perfect, people make mistakes, it's about learning from them. It was really fucked up in the moment, but instead of kicking him out of my life and cutting contact, we talked about why it happened and why he felt the need, and I feel he's a better father after that discussion. We can all only improve one step at a time. I didn't step in at the moment cause I was surprised, but we have since squashed that and moved past it. His son just always asks me to break them now, which is funny. I went on holiday for a week and asked my best friend to pop in and feed my cat. He lived a few doors away. When I got back, my cat was laying by the back door of my house, went inside and his bowl was empty. I called him and asked when the last time he fed him. He said, "Oh yeah, I forgot my cat had been outside for a week with no food or water. I haven't spoken to him in 12 years, cunt." Had a friend/roommate do that to my cats. I was going to see my family for a week, so I asked her to please feed my cats and scoop their litter box while I'm gone. She had 2 cats of her own, so I wasn't asking her to do anything she wasn't already doing, and I had done the same for her in the past. Came back after a week and not only were their food bowls empty, their water bowl was bone dry and both their beds were filled with shit and piss because she never scooped the litter and they will stop using the box if it's too dirty. I was freaking livid, but since I was living in the house she owned and paying her rent, I didn't feel like I had any recourse but to just keep my mouth shut and move out as fast possible. Fuck you, Kia. Deliberately get knocked down by a car in order to prove that when drunk, and we were very drunk, his bones were flexible. Fortunately, the car had been slowing to turn. There followed a couple of minutes trying to reassure the driver he was okay, whilst calling him an idiot. Meanwhile, he was laying flat on his back, maintaining he'd proved his point. At least he's only an idiot and not plain evil like some of these comments. You got a good friend, homie. Best friend was excited for me to meet his new GF. The whole evening he bragged about how she was still married and he was going to be the reason she got divorced. Haven't spoken to him since. Did hear she broke up with him and sorted out the issues with her husband. Brought my friend to watch my boyfriend practice his drumming. She kept spreading her legs wide wearing a skirt with no underwear. She slept with him and he left me thinking he would be with her. Needless to say, she didn't date him because she already had a boyfriend. I knew a guy who could literally tie his dick into a knot. Best answer. I needed this after all of these fucked up stories. Weirdest palate cleanser. True story, many years ago when they were alive, my grandparents would frequent Broadway and off-Broadway shows. They would attend local theater, etc. One day my grandfather announced during a family gathering that they bought tickets for a show called Puppetry of the Penis. He said they had no idea what it was until he saw the man with a gigantic penis. He said, "I didn't know if I should be horrified, impressed, or jealous." My grandmother was mortified. We grandkids had many questions. He regretted admitting that to us after that, lol. Back in high school, leaving a kegger party with a friend. There was a cat crossing the street and he sped up and ran it over. I lost it and insisted he pull over so I could check on the cat. It managed to get itself to side of road but died shortly thereafter. Told my friend to go on, I would walk home. That was the end of our friendship. This reminded me of the time I was on a walk in my neighborhood and came across a baby squirrel lying on the road. It didn't seem to be hurt, not sure how it ended up there. I stepped into the road and started trying to gently get the squirrel to move over to the grass. One of my neighbors pulled up in his pickup truck and stopped right in front of me. I said there was a baby squirrel right in front of his tire and to please wait a second while I moved it. He looked at me for a second and then said, "Well, that's the circle of life." Then he rolled right over the squirrel and killed it. Not quite as awful as your cat story, but years later I still think about it. If it helps at all, I have an opposite story to tell you. I'm from the UK, and my mother lived for a long time in the southwest. Also known as the West Country. It's hard to travel through because there aren't really any motorways, so you'll often find your journey concludes with 40 miles of country roads. Also, the people there are famously a touch eccentric. And so it was that my partner and I rounded a corner in a village and had to stop immediately because there was a line of cars in front of us and a lot of people standing around and watching. I thought, oh no, because I assumed there'd been an accident and somebody had been hit. Nope. It was a mother duck with about 8 tiny ducklings, and she'd obviously taken them to a different stream but messed up the trip back home to the nest and needed them to be able to jump up onto a curb, which most of them couldn't do. So in the end, a few gentle-minded folk got some blankets or whatever from their cars and helped each one up. Once they were all safe, Mother Duck took them through a little fence and into the home stream. Then everyone went about their day. I'm sorry for your experience. It fucking sucks. Needless cruelty can never be excused. But I hope my tale restores a little bit of faith in humanity. You're a good person, and you're not alone in that. Who even does that? I was driving home a couple of months ago and a cat ran out in front of the car. I slammed the brakes on and was convinced I'd hit the cat. Spent a good while checking the car and road looking for the cat, and another solid few minutes getting my heart rate back in order. I swear my front fender would have brushed this cat's tail. A few years back I hit a black cat that ran out right in front of me at night. I knew I hit it badly because I heard and felt it hit the front of my car and bounce once on the bottom. I didn't even have time to do more than move my foot over to the brake pedal and it was already over. I swung around to see what could be done, but amazingly the cat was already gone. I'm as certain as I can be that it limped off to die somewhere, and I still think about it every so often, if it was a stray or someone's pet, if it managed to get back to its people, just everything in general. We were working in an old lady's attic and he kicked the shit out of a pipe on purpose, then went and told her it needed to be replaced. I never worked with him again after that. Not a friend. Worked with a total piece of shit and watched him take advantage of an old lady, eventually saying some drywall needed replaced and just kicking it in. Edit, guy ended up going back to prison for stealing like $40,000 from the Boy Scouts. Some people are just pieces of shit, man. The messed up part about this story is that he was getting a bunch of work from people at his church. I've been broke and needed money, but I would never do this to get paid a little more. I was friends with a real piece of shit who, whenever we went out to eat at a restaurant, would order a steak and a tall glass of water. After the waiter would bring the food out, he'd wait until they walked away, then he'd shout, "Let's slop 'em up." He'd pour the entire glass of water over the steak. He called it sloppy steaks, and he'd do this every time we went out. He was a real piece of shit. I'll bet his hair was slicked back, right? Not pushed back. Slicked. Like a real piece of shit. Fuck those types of contractors. I'm a plumber and I value honesty and integrity. Those are the ones that give us a bad name. A friend of a friend, and this is the reason I stopped associating with both of them. The friend of my friend had just purchased new Egyptian cotton sheets, and his wife's cat had apparently got sick and threw up and shit on them. He grabbed the cat, slammed it into the wall, grabbed a lighter, and started to burn the cat's face off. It took me a little bit to process WTF was happening and to try and stop it, but the poor cat's had damage done. Lost an eye and whiskers on its left side. When I could get him to finally let go of the cat, I took it to the emergency vet. Told the vet the story of what happened. The cat was already on file for other incidents of injury, sadly, and they notified the wife. I don't really know what else came out of that as I left. I recommended she think about divorce and blocked both of them on all methods of communication. It sucked because the dude who burnt the cat was in a really good band that we would see live quite frequently, so that kind of stopped some of my social outings for a bit, but I wasn't willing to be around psychopaths like that. My cat is sitting next to me right now. I would never intentionally hurt her. I once accidentally cut one of her nails too short and felt like a total POS afterwards. How horrible do you have to be to torture an innocent creature over some goddamn sheets? I'll be hugging my kitty a little tighter today. When I was a kid, I found a baby bat that seemed injured. So I made a home for it in an old coffee can to get better. I went inside to eat lunch. After eating, I went to check on my new friend and it was nowhere to be found. Neither was my brother or neighbor, best friend at the time. I eventually found them on a trail by my house laughing hysterically. They were laughing at the bat that they had just dismembered. Still think about that often, and it's been 21 years or so. Edit, so a little more backstory on them. My brother was always abusive towards animals and other kids in the neighborhood and at school, not to mention home. He suffered a lot of mental health issues, and for some reason I try to use that to justify his actions, but truthfully I know he was just a dick. It was quite difficult growing up with him. A couple years ago he made an executive decision to leave this life. Even with all the bad shit that happened, it still messed me up a bit. I definitely do not think of him as a good person, but there was some good in there somewhere. My neighbor was similar but more mean towards people, and when they were together, they created a shitty duo. He also ended up taking his own life. It can't be easy holding on to so much hate. Was out for the night with two of my friends, and we were all crashing at one of their parents' houses that night. Get drunk, head home and decide to grab some snacks from the kitchen before hitting the sack. Out of nowhere, my friend gets a watermelon out of the fridge and dares my other friend to fuck it. We're teenage lads at this point, so we all find this hilarious, especially when my friend actually does put his dick in the thing. But that's not the fucked up bit. My friend whose house it was then takes the fucked watermelon, screams yeah, and starts to eat where it had been fucked. He then threw it full force into the wall and went to bed. Needless to say, me and the watermelon fucker went to bed that night feeling a bit weird about the dick melon munching friend. Never stayed there again. You know you've taken things too far when you make the watermelon fucker uncomfortable. My best friend had just broken up with my brother who had moved over 1,000 miles and changed jobs to be with her, citing personal differences. My brother was devastated, but I tried to respect her decision and be a source of support for both of them, especially because they truly weren't the best fit. But then she shared with me, because she knew that I loved her and would be happy for her so long as she was happy, that she'd been cheating on my brother for the past month and had found her soulmate. The depth of my brother's heartbreak, already immense, was further compounded by the infidelity. To my bewilderment, she truly couldn't understand why I was ending the friendship, seemed so distraught that I would end a years-long relationship over something so small. And I still can't comprehend why she thought telling me would result in anything other than a complete door slam. Hannah, you still suck. And I'm still angry. Whoa, this is so similar to my situation. I had to check your profile to make sure you weren't my sister, lol. In my case, we were a great fit and everyone was shocked when she left me for this other guy she just met, and even more shocked when I told them she had been talking to this other guy and expressed her feelings for him while still dating me. We stayed together another 3 weeks while she was lying to me saying she wanted to fix the relationship, all while still talking to the dude behind my back. It's insane what some people choose to ignore, like hurting someone they've cared about and loved for so long. Of course you're going to stick with family over friendship, especially if it's been an intimate relationship. Had a friend who had a 9mm handgun who liked to put a replica bullet into it and pretend he was going to shoot people at his house. He'd even go as far as squeezing the trigger to really scare the fuck out of people. One night he was drunk as hell and decided to pull this trick on a friend of his roommates who'd never been to the house before. Welp, that night the idiot accidentally put a live round into the chamber and fired. The bullet missed this girl's head by fucking inches. He begged us not to call the police. We called the police. Shit like this terrifies me. I know I'll die one day, but the thought of being killed by a moron really bothers me. It reminds me of that video of a group of friends playing with a gun whilst driving around and a girl accidentally shoots her friend in the head. Stupid people and guns do not fucking mix. Had a female friend who set me up with a friend of hers. We texted for a month or so with said friend, only to find out it was my friend, or who I thought was my friend, catfishing me. Why she did this was beyond me. I didn't think it was funny, obviously, but it fucked with my head a great deal, and when me and my other friends called her out on it with more than enough evidence to prove she did it, she still denied it. I couldn't talk or wanted to talk to a woman for about a year or so. I was so fucked IP from it. Holy shit. Your story reminded me of a podcast I listened a little while ago. It was about a girl who was also set up with her best friend's friend and was in a relationship with him for years, despite never meeting him in person because he was supposedly in prison. Turns out, her so-called best friend was the one who was catfishing her through all those years. Such a fucked up thing to do. He had me help model for one of his photo shoots that was set on top of a very tall building. When he asked me to move to the edge, he kept talking about how cool it would be to capture someone's death from a building in real time. At this point, I was getting somewhat nervous. Then he gave me a little shove. I backed away and then almost slipped. His response, "See, that could have been so cool. You have mental health issues anyways, why don't you just do it and you'll be posthumously famous, which will give your life meaning." Now keep in mind, this is paraphrased, since it's been a long time ago, but that was the gist of it, and I've never forgotten how it made me feel. After that, I started to gradually cut this person from my life out of fear that he would try to hurt me for the sake of his art. Fuck that guy. He's a fucking sadistic sociopath. 100%, in so many ways. Heard another photography story from an acquaintance years later. He tried to her to lay down in a lake for a little bit longer than she was comfortable with. So it wasn't just me. I think he was obsessed with death or hurting people. Either way, glad I didn't put up with it. A girl was falling down drunk, totally out of it, no drink spiked. She had been doing a crazy amount of shots without knowing they were double shots. This one friend of mine insisted on taking her home by himself. Me and 3 of other people in the group insisted more strongly to come along and help her home. The whole way back, he kept trying to assure us that he had things under control and didn't need our help, and it became clearer and clearer he was planning on raping her. We aggressively told him to knock it off and got her home. First, he tried to insist he should stay with her to make sure she's okay, which we vetoed. Then we caught him trying to get her keys out of her purse so he could come back inside. When that happened, we'd had enough and things got rough. We didn't beat him up, but we very forcefully got him out of her student residence building. She was in bad shape, so we found a friend of hers from down the hall who agreed to come over and look after her. We were worried she might throw up in her sleep or something. Later on that night, he got caught pounding on her dorm room door by the same friend after he managed to sneak back into the building by following someone else when they came in. The whole friend group split up over staying friends with him, but fuck that guy. She was literally passed out on her feet and totally incoherent. Good call, that's a very mature way to go about that. Holy shit. The amount of steps that man took to try and take advantage of her drunken state is insanely scary. I'm glad you guys got her home safely, and I'm glad the friend was there to look out for her. Piece of shit human being. It almost makes me feel like it was premeditated or that he's considered doing this to her before. Maybe, but more likely he's just a habitual predator. He'd probably done it before and has done it since would be my guess, unfortunately. You are amazing. I was this girl once. I had had one too many drinks. I still remember a little of what happened. I was 3 of my male friends. My female friend had gone to bed with her BF. One of the guys left to go do something and said he'd be back. The other walked out with him and the third guy grabbed my arm and made me go to his room. I was pinned to the ground saying no. It was a whisper, but somehow the guy who had gone outside came in and heard me. He kicked down the door and pulled Guy off of me. He picked me up and put me on the sofa and stayed with me all night making sure I was okay. The next morning all of the guys threw everything of the attempted rapist outside in the lawn. It was pouring rain out too. They decided then that he was no longer their friend. I cannot thank the guy enough who saved me that night. He has a good heart and head on his shoulders. In that specific situation other people did step up because he was super obvious about it. He hadn't been talking to or flirting with her before or something, and while I didn't know her before that night, she was there with our friend group. So when he loudly announced that he was going to help her get home because she was too drunk to stay, it just immediately gave at least 5 to 6 people in the group the ick. We were around a dozen people on a long picnic bench-style table, and she had been sitting on the other end of the table from him, so it was really obvious when he got up and went over to start helping her. Everyone at my end of the table just made eye contact and a bunch of people immediately got up to stop him. I just ended up being part of the group that went. I wasn't the ringleader or anything. Typing that out makes me shudder though, because if he had been sitting next to her before that, it might not have seemed so blatant. We were drunk too, and it's scary to think we might not have caught on to what was happening. Something similar happened with a friend's friend group, and I cannot believe how the group split between staying friends with the aspiring rapist or not, and I hate all those people that continued talking to him. I don't understand how my friend didn't cut them all off forever. As someone who was once that girl, thank you. I wish there had been someone like you when that happened to me that night. Sadly, my story doesn't end so well, but reading this gives me hope that there are good people still out there. A friend of 15 years, let him stay with me for 6 weeks after being kicked out, agreed to bring him on my lease since I live in a 2-bedroom alone. Asked him for rent, left to take my dog out to the park. Came back to an empty apartment and my number blocked. About 10 years ago I was raped. The first person I confided this to was my best friend. She told me it had happened to her too from the same person. It opened the floodgates for me to tell my story to more people and discover how many women in our friend group had similar stories about him. This dude was diabolical. He raped at least 5 girls from my friend group, and probably many more. The assault really messed with me. I had developed a raging depression, issues with sex insecurity. I still have night terrors to this day. My best friend knew very much how this event affected me, and I spoke to her often about how broken I was over it. She didn't want to share her experience too much after that, and I never told a soul about her encounter. It was her story to tell, not mine. Last year, she went to a concert, and when I asked who she went with, she dodged the question. I figured it was her douchebag ex that I couldn't stand, but I didn't push it. A few days later, her sister told me who she really went with. It was the guy who assaulted me. I guess he had an extra ticket and it was her favorite band. She even brought him around more of her girlfriends at the hotel they stayed at, knowing his history. It took me a few weeks before I called her out on it. I was furious and deeply hurt. I asked her how she could bring a dangerous person around more of her girlfriends knowing his history. She actively put them in danger having him around. I asked her how she could hang out with her own rapist, let alone mine, and she said that she had lied and he hadn't done that to her. She lied to me for 10 years about being raped by the same man who raped me. 10 fucking years. 3 years ago, I made the decision to stop drinking. After about 11 months of sobriety, my best friend shows up at my door, several bottles of vodka with her. I'm tired of you being sober, stop being a little bitch and get drunk with me today. After a moment of shock, I uttered, no, that's not happening, and we're never speaking again. Door closes. She tried to reconnect several times, immediately following. I'm sorry, I was only kidding and I'll kill myself if you really don't talk to me ever again. To which I replied, I will not feel guilty for any choices you choose to make in your life. Stopped her manipulation pretty good. Eventually, a relative of hers calls me asking what happened, as the friend stated that I cut them out for no reason. As soon as I told the relative, well, I got sober and they didn't like that and wanted me to drink with them again, the relative interjected, say no more, I respect you for what you did. She really needs to get some help, thanks for taking my call and explaining. In retrospect, I waited way too long to cut that friend out. You can also watch other videos by going to the channel. I will be pleased if you like them.